3 days after my husband died, my son called me and asked about money. Not how I was sleeping, not if I had eaten, not if I needed anything. He said, "Mom, did Dad have any accounts I should know about?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there in the kitchen holding the phone, staring at a cup of coffee I had poured an hour earlier and never touched. Because something about that question didn't sit right. It wasn't what he asked. It was when he asked it. 3 days. That's all it took.
Mom.
The house still felt like him. His jacket was still on the chair. His reading glasses were still on the counter. His shoes were still by the door like he had just stepped out. And I was still trying to understand how someone can be there one day and gone the next. People kept telling me to stay strong. They said time would help. They said I just needed to get through the first week. But no one tells you what that actually feels like. You wake up and forget for a second. Then you remember. And it hits you all over again. I hadn't even started going through his paperwork yet. There were envelopes stacked on the dining table. Some from the hospital, some from the bank, some I didn't even recognize. I would sit down, open one, read the first line, and then stop. It was like my brain refused to process anything that wasn't him. So when Derek asked that question, I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. I said, "I'm not sure. I haven't looked at everything yet." He paused. Not long. Just enough for me to notice. Then he said, "You should probably check. There might be things you don't know about." I said, "Okay." That was it. The call ended a minute later. At the time, I told myself it was normal. He works in mortgages. He deals with numbers all day. That's how he thinks. Practical, straight to the point. That's what I told myself. But the next day, he called again. This time, he asked how I was doing. But it didn't stay there. It shifted. "Have you talked to the bank yet?" Number, "Do you know where Dad kept his documents?" "I think so. You might want to organize everything soon. It can get complicated." I said I'll get to it. After we hung up, I sat there for a while. Not crying, just thinking. Because something felt off. Not loud, not obvious. Just enough to make me pause. Derek has always been like that. Even as a kid, he didn't talk much about feelings. He figured things out. He handled things. He moved forward. And I respected that. I always told people my son knows how to take care of business. I was proud of that. I was also the kind of mother who made things easy for him. If he needed help, I helped. If he was short on money, I covered it. If something didn't work out, I stepped in. No questions. No conditions. That's just how I was. So maybe that's why I didn't push back. Not at first. Because part of me was used to being the one who fills in the gaps. But something about those calls stayed with me. It wasn't what he said. It was the way every conversation seemed to circle back to the same place. Money, accounts, documents. On the third call, he said something that stuck. "You don't want to miss anything, Mom. Sometimes people don't realize what's there until it's too late." I asked, "Too late for what?" He said, "Just to handle it properly." I didn't ask more. I just said I understand. But I didn't. Not really. Later that afternoon, I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. The same spot where Harold used to sit every evening. I looked around the house. Everything was the same, but it didn't feel the same. And for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't just thinking about him. I was thinking about everything else. About the paperwork on the table. About the calls. About the questions. About how quickly things had shifted from loss to logistics. I picked up one of the envelopes. Mid-Atlantic Trust Bank. I opened it. Read the first page. Then the second. Slowly. Carefully. Trying to stay focused. And as I sat there going through words I didn't fully understand, yet one thought kept coming back. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Why is he asking me about money already? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But for the first time, I realized I needed one. And that realization changed the way I listened the next time my phone rang. I set the letter back on the table and just sat there a little longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't understand what I was reading, but because I was starting to understand something else. I've always been the kind of person who makes things easier for other people, especially for my son. That didn't start last year. That didn't start when he got married. That's been my role for as long as I can remember. If Derek needed something, I found a way to make it happen. When he bought his first house, he didn't have enough for the down payment. He didn't ask directly. He just mentioned it over dinner one night. Said the market was tough, said he was close, just not quite there yet. I told him we'll figure it out. A week later, I wired him $40,000. He said thank you. He meant it, but we didn't talk about it again. That's how it usually went. He would bring something up. I would step in, and we would both move on like it was normal. There was a time he called me about his credit cards. He didn't say he was struggling. He said the interest rates were ridiculous, said it didn't make sense to carry that kind of balance. I asked him how much. He hesitated, then told me I paid it off. Not because he asked, because I already knew where that conversation was going. Looking back, I can see it clearly now. At the time, I didn't question it. I told myself that's what mothers do. You help, you support, you make sure your child doesn't fall too hard. Derek has always been good with words. He doesn't push, he doesn't demand. He presents things in a way that sounds reasonable, practical, like he's just thinking things through out loud. Tasha is different. She says exactly what she wants. I remember the first time she came over after they got engaged. She walked through my house, looked around and said, "This place has potential." I laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Over the years, she would drop little comments about upgrades, about neighborhoods, about how things could be better. Not directly asking, but always pointing in a direction. I didn't take it personally. I told myself she just had different tastes, different priorities, and maybe that was true. But I also know this. Every time something came up, Derek would eventually circle back to me, not in a demanding way, just in a way that assumed I would be part of the solution. And I always was. I never kept track of how much I gave. I didn't write anything down. I didn't ask for anything in return. Because to me, it wasn't a transaction. It was family. I used to say something all the time. It's okay if something didn't go as planned. If I had to move money around, if I had to adjust my own plans. It's okay. I said it so often I don't think I realized what it was doing. It made everything look easy. It made it seem like there was no cost. Like helping didn't take anything out of me. But it did. Just not in a way I paid attention to. When Harold was alive, he used to look at me sometimes and shake his head. Not in a bad way. More like he was trying to tell me something without saying it out loud. One night after Derek had left, he said, "You don't always have to fix everything." I told him I'm not fixing anything, I'm just helping. He didn't argue. He just nodded. I didn't think much about that conversation at the time. Now I do. Because sitting in that living room looking at those papers, hearing my son's voice in my head asking about accounts, I started to wonder something I had never really asked myself before. What happens when you're always the one who gives? And you stop. That question didn't come with an answer. Not right away. But it stayed there. Quiet. Persistent. And for the first time, I didn't push it away. I thought about all the times I stepped in without being asked. All the times I made things easier. All the times I said it's okay when it really wasn't. Not in a dramatic way. Not with regret. Just honestly. Because the truth is I never felt used. I felt needed. There's a difference. Or at least I used to think there was. Now I wasn't so sure. I got up, walked back into the kitchen, and poured out the coffee I never drank. Made a fresh cup. Sat down again. The house was still quiet. Still heavy. But something inside me had shifted just a little. Not enough to change anything yet, but enough to notice. And once you notice something like that, it's hard to go back to not seeing it. I let the coffee sit untouched again and reached for the next envelope. This one was thicker, Blue River Life Assurance. I almost set it back down, not because I didn't want to deal with it, because I knew once I opened it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I slid it open slowly. Paper inside, several pages, a name I recognized, Harold's. The first paragraph was formal. Condolences, policy reference, instructions. I skimmed it at first. Then I stopped, went back, read it again. Slower this time. There was a number. It didn't feel real at first. It felt like something you see in an ad or on TV, not something tied to your life. I put the paper down, picked it back up, checked it again. Same number. No mistake. $2 million. Life insurance. I didn't react. Not the way people think you would. No shock. No excitement, no sense of relief, just silence. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the wall, because in that moment all I could think was, I would give every dollar of this back to have him walk through that door again. That thought stayed there longer than the number did. The next day, I had a scheduled call with someone from Mid-Atlantic Trust Bank. I almost canceled it, but I didn't. The man on the phone spoke clearly, calm voice, professional tone. He walked me through things step by step. Accounts, beneficiaries, transfers. There was more. A retirement account, a 401k rolled into an IRA, investments I didn't know he still had. He gave me estimates, not exact totals, but close enough. By the time the call ended, I had a clearer picture. Not just 2 million, closer to 4, maybe more depending on how everything settled. He asked if I had any questions. I said no. I didn't trust myself to ask the right ones yet. After the call, I didn't move. I sat there with the phone in my hand, just listening to the quiet in the room, because now there were two things I was trying to hold at the same time. I had just lost my husband, and somehow I had gained more money than I had ever imagined having. Those two things don't balance each other out. They don't cancel each other. They don't even belong in the same sentence. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. Same street, same houses, same afternoon light. Nothing had changed, and everything had. I thought about calling Derek, just telling him, getting it out of the way, but something stopped me. Not fear, not even hesitation, just a feeling. I went back to the table, sat down, looked at the papers again, and the thought came clear this time. Not loud, not emotional, just steady. Don't tell anyone. I didn't argue with it. I didn't try to explain it. I just sat there and let it settle. Because if I was being honest, I wasn't ready for what came after telling people. Not the conversations, not the questions, not the expectations. Money changes things, even when you don't want it to. I had seen it before, not in my life, but in other people's. People act differently when they know you have something they don't. Sometimes they get closer. Sometimes they pull away. Sometimes they start seeing you differently, even if you haven't changed at all. And right now, I didn't have the energy for that. I folded the papers, put them back in the envelope, then placed that envelope under a small stack of others. Not hidden, just not visible. That evening, Derek called again. I looked at the phone for a second before answering. Hey, Mom. Hi. You doing okay? I'm all right. A short pause. Then, did you get a chance to look at any of Dad's stuff today? There it was again. Same direction, different wording. I said a little. What did you find? I leaned back in the chair, looked at the ceiling, let the silence sit for a second. Just paperwork, I said, still going through it. He didn't push. Not directly. Okay, just make sure you don't miss anything. There could be accounts you didn't know about. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was accurate. I'll keep that in mind, I said. We talked for another minute. Nothing important. Then the call ended. I set the phone down and stayed where I was, because now I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. He was asking, carefully, consistently. And for the first time, I wasn't rushing to fill in the gaps. I wasn't offering more than what was asked. I wasn't trying to make things easier. I just stayed where I was. And that felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable, just different. Different enough that I noticed it. And once I noticed it, I didn't feel the need to change it. I slid the envelope a little farther under the stack without really thinking about it, not hiding it, just not putting it front and center. That decision didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel like a strategy. It felt like the only thing that made sense at the time. Because once you say something out loud, you can't take it back. And I wasn't ready for that. The next morning, I made a list. Not a big one, just simple things. Call the bank back, gather documents, find Harold's passwords. That was it. I didn't write tell Derek. I didn't write update family. It didn't even cross my mind to put it down. I started going through drawers. Desk first, then the cabinet in the hallway. Harold always kept things organized. Labels, folders, everything in place. I found statements, account summaries, old tax returns. Some of it I understood. Some of it I didn't. Normally I would have called Derek. He's good with numbers. He knows how to read this stuff faster than I do. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there with the calculator and took my time. Looked things up, read slowly, called the bank when I had questions. It took longer, but I understood more. That was new for me. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Tasha. She didn't call often. Mostly texts, short ones. I picked up. Hey, Evelyn. Hi, Tasha. How are you holding up? I'm managing. She paused. Not long, just enough. I was thinking about you, she said. This must be a lot to deal with. It is. Another pause. Then, have you figured out all the financial stuff yet? There it was again. Different voice. Same direction. Not yet, I said, still going through everything. Yeah, I figured, she said. There's usually more than people expect. I didn't respond to that. She added, if you need help, Derek's really good with that kind of thing. I know. We talked for another minute. About nothing. Then she hung up. I sat there, phone still in my hand. Because now it wasn't just Derek. It was the same question. From two different people. Not aggressive. Not obvious. But consistent. I put the phone down and went back to the papers. For the first time, I paid attention to how I felt during those conversations. Not what they said. How it landed. There was something underneath it. Not concern. Not exactly. More like expectation. Not spoken. But there. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. Sat down with the same advisor I spoke to on the phone. He walked me through everything again. Slower this time. I asked more questions. Took notes. Didn't rush. At one point, he asked, do you have anyone helping you with this? I thought about Derek. About how easy it would be to say yes. But I said no. I'm handling it myself. He nodded. Didn't question it. That answer felt small, but it wasn't. It was the first time I chose not to bring someone else into something automatically. When I got home, I put everything back on the table, neatly this time, grouped, organized, not perfect, but clear. Later that evening, Derek called again. Hey, Mom. Hi. You busy? No. Did you get a chance to go through more of Dad's stuff today? I looked at the papers in front of me. I did a little more, I said. Anything stand out? That question again. I leaned back in the chair, let the silence sit for a second longer than usual, just trying to understand everything I said. There's a lot. He exhaled softly. Yeah, that's why I keep telling you don't have to do it alone. I didn't respond right away, because I realized something in that moment. Every time I left space in the conversation, he filled it with the same offer. Help. But it didn't feel like help anymore. Not in the way it used to. It felt like a door, one that kept being open just enough, waiting for me to step through. I appreciate that I said, I'll let you know if I need it. He didn't push. All right, he said, just don't wait too long. I won't. We hung up. I stayed in that chair for a while, because something had changed. Not outside. Inside. I wasn't avoiding the conversation. I was choosing how much of it I wanted to be in. And for the first time, I realized I didn't owe anyone full access. Not to my thoughts. Not to my decisions. Not to anything I wasn't ready to share. That realization didn't come with a big reaction. No moment of clarity. No sudden shift. Just a quiet understanding. I looked down at the papers again, then at my phone, and instead of picking it up to explain anything, I left it exactly where it was. I left my phone on the table and didn't pick it up for the rest of the night. That was new. Normally I would have followed up, sent a message, clarified something, smoothed the edges, but I didn't. The next few days were quiet, not peaceful, just steady. I kept working through the paperwork, one folder at a time, one account at a time. I learned things I hadn't paid attention to before, where the money actually sat, how it moved, what it meant to control it. It wasn't complicated, just unfamiliar. And the more I understood it, the less I felt like I needed someone else to explain it to me. That surprised me. Midweek, Derek called again. Hey, Mom? Hi. You doing okay? I'm all right. Short pause. Then, have you talked to the bank again? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. Yes, I said. I had a meeting. How'd it go? Fine. Another pause. Did they explain everything clearly? They did. He waited. Not long, but long enough. Like he expected more. I didn't give it. Instead, I asked, how's work? That caught him off guard. I could hear it in his voice. It's busy, he said. Rates are all over the place right now. We talked about that for a minute. Then he circled back. You know, stuff like this can get complicated fast. People miss things all the time. I leaned back in the chair, looked at the ceiling again. I'm taking it slow, I said. Just don't want you to overlook anything, he added. I won't. That was the end of it. But it wasn't. Not really. Because after that call, I noticed something I hadn't fully seen before. It wasn't just the questions. It was the timing. Every call. Same pattern. Check on me. Quick. Then shift. Bank. Accounts. Documents. Not once did we stay on how I was actually doing. Not once did he ask anything that didn't connect back to the same place. I didn't confront him. Didn't call it out. I just paid attention. 2 days later, Tasha texted, Hey, just checking in. How are you? I stared at the message for a second, then typed back, I'm okay. She responded quickly, Glad to hear that. This must be a lot. I didn't answer right away. Then another message came in. Have you figured out what Harold had set up financially? I set the phone down. Didn't respond. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Another message. If you need help, Derek can go through everything with you. He's really good at that. I picked the phone back up, typed one sentence. I'm taking care of it. That was it. No explanation, no details. She didn't respond after that. I put the phone face down on the table, and for the first time, I felt something shift in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was clarity. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. Because now it wasn't one person. It wasn't one question. It was a pattern, and patterns don't lie. Later that week, Derek stopped by, unannounced. He knocked and opened the door halfway before I even got there. Hey, Mom, he said, stepping inside like he always had. Hi. He looked around. At the table. At the folders. At the papers. You've been busy? He said. I've been working through things. He walked over to the table. Didn't sit. Just stood there, looking down. You making sense of it all? I am. He nodded. Slow. Then he picked up one of the folders. Flipped it open. Mind if I take a look? I watched him for a second. Not what he was doing. How he was doing it, like it was already his to go through. Let me handle it, I said. He paused, just for a second, then closed the folder. Set it back down. Just trying to help, he said. I know. Silence. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water like nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had. But for me, something had, because I saw it now. Not clearly enough to explain it, but clearly enough to feel it. The way he moved, the way he asked, the way everything seemed to come back to the same place. He came back into the living room. You thought about what I said the other day, he asked. About what? About the house. I looked at him. You've got a lot of space here, he said. Might make sense to simplify things, less to manage. I didn't answer right away, because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about money. It was about positioning, about where I stood, and where he expected me to move. I'm not making any big decisions right now, I said. He nodded, like he understood, but I could tell he didn't agree. Just something to think about, he said. I'll think about it. He stayed a little longer, talked about work, traffic, nothing important. Then he left. I walked back into the living room and looked at the table again, at the folders, at the space where he had been standing, and this time I didn't second guess what I was seeing. I didn't explain it away, didn't soften it. I just let it be what it was. And once I did that, it was hard to see it any other way. I kept the folders exactly where they were after he left. Didn't reorganize them, didn't move anything around, just left them the way they were. Not because I forgot, because I wanted to see something. The next morning, I made breakfast for myself for the first time in days. Nothing special, toast, eggs, coffee. I sat at the table, looked at the same papers, but I wasn't overwhelmed anymore. I was paying attention, not to the numbers, to the feeling, because something had shifted in me the day before. When he picked up that folder, when he didn't ask first, when it felt assumed. That stayed with me. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Derek again. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Hey, Mom. Hi. You busy? Just having lunch. Pause. Then, I was thinking about yesterday. I didn't say anything. You know I didn't mean to overstep, he said. I just don't want you to get stuck with something you don't understand. I took a sip of coffee. Let him finish. I deal with this stuff all the time, he added. It's easy to miss things if you're not used to it. That word again. Miss. I set the cup down slowly. I'm taking my time, I said. Yeah, but time isn't always your friend with this kind of thing, he replied. I almost smiled again. Not because it was funny, because I was starting to hear it differently now. Not urgency, not concern, pressure, subtle, well-worded. But there, I appreciate that, I said. I'm still going to go through it myself first. He didn't respond right away. Then, all right, just don't wait too long before getting help. I won't. We stayed on the phone for another minute. Then he said he had to get back to work. I hung up and sat there with that word still in my head. Help. I used to hear that and feel relieved, supported, taken care of. Now it felt different. Now it felt like something being offered with a direction attached. Later that afternoon, I drove to a small office building in Baltimore. I had looked it up the night before. Estate attorney, Daniel Klein. I didn't call ahead. Just walked in. The receptionist looked up. Do you have an appointment? No, I said. I just need to ask a few questions. She hesitated, then asked me to take a seat. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man in his late 50s. Calm, direct, no rush. What can I help you with? He asked. I didn't give him a long story, didn't explain everything. I just said, my husband passed away recently. I'm trying to understand how to keep control over what he left behind. He nodded, didn't interrupt. Do you have children? He asked. One. Are you concerned about how assets might be accessed or managed? I paused, thought about Derek, about the questions, about the folders. Yes, I said. He leaned back slightly. Then the first thing you need is structure, he said. Something that clearly defines who has access when and under what conditions. I listened. He explained. Revocable living trust asset control decision authority. Nothing complicated, just clear. You're not taking anything away from anyone, he added. You're just making sure decisions stay with you. That sentence stayed with me. Not taking anything away, just keeping control. That felt right. I didn't sign anything that day. Didn't rush into decisions. But I walked out of that office understanding something I didn't before. I had options. And more importantly, I didn't have to include anyone in those decisions until I chose to. That was new. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. Just let the silence sit. Not heavy silence, clear silence. When I got back, the house felt different again. Not lighter, but steadier. I walked to the table, looked at the folders. This time I didn't feel like I was catching up. I felt like I was deciding. That evening, Derek called again. I picked up on the first ring. Hey, Mom. Hi. You get anything done today? I thought about the office, the conversation, the word control. Yes, I said, I handled a few things. Like what? I leaned back in the chair. looked at the window. Just getting organized, I said. Pause. That's good, he replied. Just make sure you're not doing it all on your own. I didn't respond right away, because now I understood something clearly. Every time he said that, he wasn't just offering help. He was asking for a way in. I'm fine, I said. Another pause. All right, he said. If you say so. We ended the call shortly after. I placed the phone down slowly, and for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't confused about what I was hearing anymore. I didn't need more time. I didn't need more proof. I already had enough. I left the phone on the table and didn't touch it for a while. Not because I was upset, because I didn't feel the need to respond to anything that hadn't been said yet. That feeling was new. Usually I would have replayed the conversation in my head, thought about what I should have said differently, fixed something that didn't even need fixing. But this time I didn't. Over the next week, the calls didn't stop. They just adjusted. Derek didn't ask as directly. He didn't mention accounts as often, but the direction was still there. Mom, you sure you're keeping up with everything? Yeah. You know things can slip through the cracks. I'm staying on top of it. Same conversation. Different wording. I started noticing something else too. The timing. He didn't call randomly. He called after I had appointments, after I had time to go through things, after I had space to figure things out on my own. Like he was checking in on progress, not on me. One afternoon, he called while I was driving back from the bank. Hey, Mom. Hi. You just coming from somewhere? I looked at the road ahead. Yeah. Where? That question sat there for a second. Running errands, I said. Pause. You talked to the bank again. I could hear it now. Clear. No confusion. Yes, I said. And I stopped at a red light, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. They answered my questions. Another pause. Longer this time. That's good, he said. Just making sure you're not missing anything important. There it was again. Missing. I didn't respond to that. He continued. You know, if something gets overlooked, it can cost you later. I almost laughed. Not out loud, just in my head. Because for the first time, I heard the sentence without the tone, without the intention he wanted it to carry. And what I heard was simple. Control. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just consistent. I'm handling it, I said. Another pause. All right, he replied. But this time it didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like he was adjusting. That evening, Tasha called. Not a text. A call. Hey, Evelyn. Hi. How are you doing today? I'm fine. Her tone was softer than usual. Careful. I was talking to Derek earlier, she said. He's just worried about you. I didn't respond. He said you've been going through everything by yourself, she added. I have, I said. That's a lot for one person. I'm managing. Pause. You don't have to do everything alone, she said. That's what family is for. I leaned back in the chair, looked at the ceiling again. Same word, different voice. Family. I used to hear that and feel comfort. Now it sounded like a reason. I understand, I said. She didn't stop there. We just don't want you making decisions without support, she added. Support. Another word, carefully chosen. I'm not making any big decisions, I said. Well, that's good, she replied. But when you do, you should have someone with experience involved. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Like Derek, she added. Of course. I let that sit there. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. I'll think about it, I said. She seemed satisfied with that. Okay, she replied. We just want what's best for you. We? That word stayed with me after the call ended. Not just Derek anymore. It was a conversation between two people. About me. Without me. I sat there in the quiet again. And this time the feeling wasn't subtle. It was clear. This wasn't about helping me understand something. It was about making sure I didn't move forward without them. That was the difference. And once I saw that everything else lined up, the calls, the questions, the timing, the words, all of it, not random, not concern, a pattern. I walked into the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and stood there for a minute, thinking about how easy it would have been to follow that path, to say yes, to let Derek sit at the table with those folders, to hand things over piece by piece. Not because he forced me, because I would have made it easy. That's what I've always done. But this time something held. Not resistance, not anger, just awareness. I took a sip of coffee and set the cup down, because now I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Not every offer to help is about helping. Sometimes it's about making sure you don't move without them. And I wasn't moving that way anymore. I left the coffee on the counter and walked back to the table without rushing. Not because I didn't know what to do, because I finally did. The folders were still there, neatly stacked, exactly where I had left them. For the first time, I didn't see them as something overwhelming. I saw them as something I controlled. That shift was small, but it changed everything. The next morning, I called Daniel Klein's office. This time, I made an appointment. When I sat across from him again, I didn't hesitate. I didn't explain the situation in detail. I didn't mention Derek. I didn't need to. I want to set up a structure, I said. Something that keeps everything organized under me. He nodded like he already knew where this was going. We went over it step by step. A revocable living trust. Assets transferred into it. Clear authority. Clear boundaries. No confusion about who decides. No room for assumption. You stay in control, he said. That's the point. I signed the initial paperwork that afternoon. Not rushed. Not emotional. Just certain. On the drive home, I didn't feel stressed. I didn't feel defensive. I felt steady. Not because I had more money. Because I had more clarity. That evening, Derek called again. I answered without hesitation. Hey, Mom. Hi. You been busy today? I leaned back in the chair, looked at the same spot on the wall I had been staring at for days. Yes, I said. I took care of a few things. Like what? There it was. Same question. Different tone. I didn't fill the space. I didn't explain. Just getting things in order, I said. Pause. Did you talk to anyone about it? He asked. I could hear the shift now. Not subtle anymore. More direct. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Who, he asked? I let that question sit there. Didn't rush to answer it. A professional, I said. Silence. Not empty. Not neutral. Tight. Okay, he said finally. That's good. But it didn't sound like he meant it. You know, I could have helped you with that, he added. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. I know. Another pause. You don't have to do everything through someone else, he said. I'm right here. That line would have worked on me before. It would have made me feel guilty, like I was shutting him out. But now I heard it differently. Not support, expectation. I'm handling it, I said. No extra words, no softening, just that. He didn't respond right away. Then, all right. But again, it didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like adjustment, like he was recalculating. We talked for another minute, nothing important. Then he asked it. Clear, direct. Ma, are you okay financially? No setup, no lead-in, just the question. I sat there for a second, phone in my hand, because I knew this was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, but important. The way I answered this would set everything else. I didn't rush, didn't overthink it. I'm okay, I said. That was it. No numbers, no explanation, no reassurance beyond that. Just enough. There was a pause on the other end. Short, but noticeable. Then he shifted. All right, he said. That's all I wanted to know. It wasn't, but that's what he said. We ended the call. I set the phone down slowly. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had left something unsaid. I felt like I had said exactly what I needed to. Nothing more, nothing less. I looked at the folders again, at the space around them. Everything was still there. Nothing had changed on the outside, but something had settled inside me. Not tension, not doubt. Control, not over anyone else, over myself. I didn't need to convince anyone, didn't need to explain my choices. I just needed to stand in them, and that's what I was doing now, quietly, without asking for permission, without making an announcement, just choosing differently, and not stepping back from it. I sat with this story for a while after hearing it, and I'll be honest with you, it stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because of the money, not because of the situation, but because of how quiet everything was. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no moment where everything exploded. Just a woman who stopped explaining herself and started paying attention. And that right there is something most people never do. If you really think about it, nothing in her story was unrealistic. That's what makes it uncomfortable. A son asking questions that sound reasonable. A daughter-in-law offering help that sounds supportive. A family that looks normal on the surface. You've probably heard conversations like that before. You might have even been in them. What stood out to me wasn't what Derek said. It was what he didn't say. He didn't ask how she was really holding up. He didn't sit in the discomfort of her loss. He didn't slow down and just be present. He moved forward to the next step, to the next concern, to the next opportunity. And that's where a lot of people get confused, because it doesn't look like betrayal at first. It looks like practicality. That's the part most people miss. Not all betrayal is loud. Not all of it is obvious. Sometimes it's just misalignment. One person is grieving, the other person is calculating. And those two things don't exist in the same emotional space. What Evelyn did differently is what changed everything. She didn't react. She didn't confront. She didn't try to fix the relationship. She just stopped. Stopped over-explaining. Stopped filling silence. Stopped making things easier for everyone else. That's not something we're taught to do, especially not in families. We're taught to stay connected, to keep things smooth, to avoid tension. And sometimes that means ignoring what we feel, just to keep the peace. But here's the truth. Peace that requires you to ignore reality isn't peace. It's just quiet discomfort. What she did wasn't revenge in the way people usually think about it. There was no plan to get back at anyone, no moment where she tried to prove a point. But it was still a form of control. And in a lot of ways, it was more powerful than any confrontation because she didn't give access. She didn't give information. She didn't give control. That's something a lot of people struggle with. The idea that you can care about someone and still not give them full access to your life. That you can love someone and still have boundaries. That you can be kind without being available for everything. Most people think those things cancel each other out. They don't. One of the biggest lessons in this story is simple. Not everyone who asks questions deserves answers. That doesn't mean people are bad. It means you have to be aware of what's being asked and why. There's also something else that stood out. Evelyn didn't change overnight. She didn't become a different person. She just became more aware of the patterns that were already there. That's important because a lot of people think growth means becoming someone new. Most of the time, it just means seeing clearly for the first time. When you stop reacting automatically, you start noticing things you used to ignore. The timing of a question, the tone of a conversation, the direction things keep going. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Another thing I want to point out is this. She didn't cut her son off. She didn't create a big divide. She didn't make a dramatic statement. She just stopped participating the same way. That's a different kind of strength. It's not loud. It's not visible, but it changes everything. Because when you change your response, the dynamic has to change with it. Now let's talk about real life. Because this isn't just a story. This happens every day. People overgive. People overexplain. People stay in roles that no longer serve them. And they do it because it feels familiar. Because it avoids conflict. Because it keeps things normal. But normal doesn't always mean healthy. If there's one thing to take from this, it's this. Pay attention to patterns, not just what people say once, what they say over time. And ask yourself a simple question. Do I feel respected in this space? Or just expected? That question alone can change how you see everything. You don't have to confront everything. You don't have to call people out. You don't have to prove anything. But you do have to decide what you allow. And that's where most people hesitate. Because saying less feels like you're holding back. Setting boundaries feels like you're pushing people away. But in reality, you're just protecting your space. That's not selfish. That's necessary. This story isn't about money. It's not really about inheritance. It's about awareness. It's about control. It's about choosing how much of yourself you give and to who. And that's something that applies to every part of life. Relationships, family, work, everything. If you've ever felt like you were giving more than you were receiving, if you've ever felt like people only show up when they need something, if you've ever questioned whether someone really sees you or just what you can provide, then this story probably hit a little closer than expected. That's why stories like this matter, not just because they're emotional, but because they're real. This is the kind of thing you see in everyday life, in quiet conversations, in small moments, in things people don't talk about openly. That's what makes these kinds of revenge stories different. They're not about getting even. They're about getting clear. And once you're clear, you move differently. If this made you think about your own life in a new way, make sure you're subscribed. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories. We break down real family stories, real family drama, and the kind of situations people deal with every day, but don't always talk about. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can learn is not how to respond louder, but how to respond less and mean it.